talking politics, and this happens to be one of my favorite races. This is a race that's really important for you guys to vote in the primary for, and so I hope you learned something tonight from our excellent Attorney General candidates. And luckily, we have our favorite Mike Wheat here today, and he's going to be asking these guys some questions. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Mike and remind you all to vote, 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 vote. Vote this primary. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. Like Hillary said, I'm Mike Wheat. And am I online there? Can't tell. I don't see anything. Anyway, I'll keep going. It's my pleasure to moderate the debate tonight between Kimberly Dudik and Graybill, our wonderful candidates for Attorney General. And before we get started, I'm going to read a biographical background for both Kimberly and Raph that were presented to me by them. And then after that, I will we'll get started with the debate. So let me start. I'm going to start with Kimberly. Kimberly Dudik is running for Montana Attorney General to make the Attorney General a true champion of Montana citizens. She is a proven reformer and fighter for everyday Montanans. She has served Montanans for 8 years in the Montana House of Representatives, winning 4 general and 2 primary elections, championing initiatives that reform public safety, guard communities from sex offenders, safeguard vulnerable populations, especially children, reform criminal justice, and hold bad actors accountable. She has been an attorney in Montana for nearly 18 years, serving approximately 6 years on the front lines as an assistant attorney general and deputy county attorney, holding offenders accountable and ensuring community safety. She has protected workers' rights, represented crime victims, and ensured child safety as a Montana attorney in her private law practice. Her legal experience includes also enforcing justice as a substitute municipal court judge and Montana Supreme Court law clerk. Kimberly's legal knowledge is complemented by her work serving Montana's communities as an advocate for survivors of domestic violence and a registered nurse specializing in neonatal intensive care prior to becoming an attorney. Next, I'll introduce you to Raph Graybill. A 5th-generation Montanan, Raph Graybill grew up in Great Falls and earned a Rhodes Scholarship before graduating from Yale Law School. Raph is the chief legal counsel to Montana Governor Steve Bullock. In that capacity, he has led the governor's efforts to protect public lands and beat the Trump administration in federal court to keep dark money out of our elections. Raph defended the Montana Constitution and public schools before the U.S. Supreme Court and won a landmark victory against big tobacco companies selling vape products to kids. He is endorsed by former Governor Schweitzer, retired Senator Baucus, the Montana Federation of Public Employees, and Montana Conservation Voters. He and his wife, Marissa, live in Helena with their daughter, Genevieve. Now I'm going to introduce the format under which I will be asking questions, and Kimberly and Raph will be answering. And Kimberly, before we get started, do you mind if I call you Kim, or do you prefer Kimberly?
Either one is fine.
Thank you. Both Kim and Raph will have 1.5 minutes to answer the questions that I ask. There will be no rebuttal. We will alternate the first questions that are asked, and they will each have 3 minutes for a closing statement. With that, I'm going to give just a brief prologue, and then we'll get into our first question. Our lives have been turned upside down, and we're facing an unprecedented crisis as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. As we work through this crisis, we can expect to be preyed upon by unscrupulous characters trying to scam and defraud our friends and neighbors in our communities. As the state's chief law enforcement officer, the Attorney General will need to employ the powers of the office to thwart these efforts and protect Montana consumers. Furthermore, the Attorney General has many powers it can exercise to promote justice and protect our citizenry. Our questions tonight will focus on a number of these critical powers. So for the first question, and I've broken down the questions, the first 4 questions are going to be in the area of consumer protection. The first one will go to you, Kim. Within the Attorney General's office is a division for consumer protection. Democratic champions such as Elizabeth Warren have rightly brought voters' attention to the value of strong consumer protection. As Attorney General, how would you utilize the Consumer Protection Division inside the Attorney General's office?
Thank you for the question, Mike. It's actually a really important question because the Attorney General is the chief legal advocate for the state and is in charge of protecting citizens' rights. I've spent the last 8 years as an attorney, but also I spent the last 8 years as a legislator running the state's budget for the Consumer Protection Division. And in doing this, I know that the money comes into that division from settlements. And so I would make sure, first of all, that the settlement money we have coming in goes through to the consumers to protect them as it's supposed to. But more specifically, I would actually bolster that office. That office is the one that should be on the front lines championing what we need for protecting us from prescription drug price gouging that we're seeing, and also some of the consumer fraud that's coming about because of the COVID-19 epidemic. To complement what the Consumer Protection Office does, I would create a prescription drug accountability task force to address drug pricing and related practices in Montana. I'd also look at price gouging, enforcing our laws, and if anything needs to be tightened up through legislation, I'd be doing that also. I'd be looking at our consumer fraud laws and making sure that that office is talking with consumers throughout the state and ensuring that our rights are protected, that our antitrust laws are being enforced, and also that any sort of anti-kickback laws that we need to strengthen are strengthened in our state to make sure that pharmaceutical companies aren't profiting off of our illness. But beyond that, there are many other consumer issues that people deal with on a regular basis, and the Attorney General needs to be at the forefront of leading those to protect our consumers. We have to make sure that we robustly regulate the prescription benefit managers that are actually profiting from our pharmaceuticals right now. And we need to increase transparency with how our drugs are priced. I've fought for that as a lawmaker. I'll continue that fight for that as an Attorney General, and I'll make sure that that office is first and foremost protecting citizens' rights and ensuring that consumers are not being taken advantage of by corporations.
Thank you, Kim. Raph, same question to you.
This is a huge issue. I'm so glad you brought it up. This is one of the roles that makes the Attorney General's office and position so unique and so important. Mike, you know this from your private career in legal practice. There are all kinds of ways that sophisticated special interests, wealthy interests, take our legal system, our rights, and use the courts and use the legislature to carve them away from us. Well, what's our counterbalance? Well, the natural counterbalance under our Constitution is the Attorney General. It's the Attorney General who gets to bring suit and go to court and enforce those laws that give us a say, that give us power, that give us a role in enforcing our rights. Now, the Consumer Protection Division you ask about is crucially important, but it's only got 3 lawyers. And it's hard to imagine those 3 lawyers keeping up with landlord-tenant issues in one town in Montana, much less deal with the large ways in which big corporations and other sophisticated interests shift power away from us using the legal system. So one of the things I would do is I would get all the lawyers that work in the civil division to start thinking first and foremost of their jobs as promoting and protecting our rights and freedoms. If you go to my website, rafgraybill.com, we've released a comprehensive, detailed plan about how the laws that we have now protect us from things like illegal price fixing, illegal price gouging on prescription drugs. And we detail various ways that the Attorney General's office, using the laws in place now, can make a real difference and put money back in your pocket. I am so proud of this plan. This is something that no one was talking about in this race a year ago when we got in, and now everybody is, because we realize that this office isn't just another political position to run for. This is a really unique office that allows the right office holder with the right experience taking on these cases in court to win for us and to be a real advocate for us again. So I think it's incredibly important, and that office should take the central role in the next Attorney General's administration.
All right, thank you, Raph. Okay, our next question. It's still under this area of consumer protection, but it deals with healthcare. And you'll answer this one first, Ray. The Affordable Care Act has provided vital health insurance coverage to some 45,000 Montanans. The Republican mantra has always been, and in fact still is during these difficult times, to repeal and replace the ACA. In fact, if you go to Republican AG candidate Knudsen's website, he states therein, and I quote, he's talking about AG Fox, he hasn't done enough to repeal the ACA, end of quote. What efforts would you take to defend and protect the rights of healthcare for all Montanans?
Well, I think it starts with stopping this completely irresponsible Republican lawsuit that is designed to destroy the ACA. And this is what Representative Knudsen's talking about. There is a lawsuit, there's been lawsuits for the last 10 years trying to dismantle the ACA. And the current lawsuit is no different. It's being led by conservative Republican attorneys general. And the goal is to really get rid of all of the essential protections of the ACA. Not only does the ACA provide expanded Medicaid to about 90,000 Montanans, but it provides protections for 430,000 Montanans who have pre-existing conditions. All of that is on the line. And I'll tell you two things. One, this is the kind of case where having someone whose primary experience is in fighting and winning complicated national scale lawsuits really matters. Having an attorney general who won't just delegate it to the staff, but can get in there and personally litigate these cases, that's what motivates me to run, and that's what I'll do on this case. The second thing I'll say is this. If taking people's health care away were a winning message in Montana, John Tester wouldn't be our senator. They ran the same thing against him. And that's why I think Austin Knudsen is going to come out of that primary, and I think Democrats can win this seat in November because we can say what Democrats will do in the AG's office is protect you and protect your health care.
Thank you. Kim?
I think that the healthcare of our state is really one of the primary issues that everyone's concerned with right now. And I'm glad you asked this question because not only have I been an attorney for 18 years, but I was also a registered nurse specializing in neonatal intensive care. I've served on our hospital board. I've written and implemented state policy about Medicaid expansion, so I understand it inside and out. And I think it's really important that we do have qualified people elected to these offices with broad experience. You know, I actually have 2 times the length and depth of experience than any of my other opponents in this race, and sometimes 3 times as much. And I think if we want to see real change in our state, we need to elect people with the proven ability to get things done. And I have that over 18 years as an attorney and also as a healthcare professional. We do have over really 400,000 people in our state with pre-existing conditions, but also we have over 100,000 people who've sought preventive care through the Affordable Care Act expansion. If we were to lose Medicaid expansion, we would lose all of that. People would no longer have access to covering their children until they are 26 years old. And if you have a pre-existing condition, you could lose all your coverage. And nearly everyone has a pre-existing condition. It's everything from having acne to being pregnant. So just about everyone has some sort of pre-existing condition. The Attorney General needs to be fighting for full health care to ensure that we continue Medicaid expansion and even to strengthen the programs that we have, which I actually helped pass 2 times. We need to ensure that the enrollment criteria isn't discriminatory and that it's as easy as possible for people to enroll, but also we need to work at eliminating any sort of asset testing or work requirements that people may be subject to right now, because those are fundamentally unfair and actually have been held unconstitutional in other states. So we need to strengthen the Medicaid that we have. Everyone needs health care. It should be a right. It is not treated like that by some of the Republicans, and we need to fight against that. Because everyone, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Green Party, or Independent, or Libertarian, or even if you don't vote, you need to have health care. And this should be what we're fighting for. And as Attorney General, I'll continue that fight.
Thank you, Kim. All right, the next area, and I think both of you may have even already touched on this, it's related to prescription drug prices. The cost of prescription drugs is both worrisome and stressful for all Montanans. What power does the Attorney General have to challenge and reduce the high costs of prescription medications? And would you, in fact, exercise that power? You're up, Kimberly.
All right. I would exercise that power. The Attorney General has broad powers. You know, some people see the Attorney General as only a lawyer or an attorney, and that's such a narrow interpretation because it's so much more. The Attorney General is also a key policymaker, bringing a package of bills to every legislative session to reform the law in a way that that Attorney General sees fit. And so I would utilize the powers of the Attorney General's office on the front lines, fighting to enforce our laws, but also changing our policies so that they were more fair. And I talked about this already, but I'll say it again. We have a comprehensive plan to deal with our prescription drug prices. And it's been something I've been working on for 8 years. So we need to create a prescription drug accountability task force that's a multidisciplinary team to look at what drug pricing is like in our state and what other related practices are leading to increased prices. We have to enforce our existing laws dealing with drug price gouging, which is occurring, and also any sort of monopolistic actions that are occurring where we have the pharmaceutical companies or others setting prices that then Montanans who are sick or need their medicines have to pay. We have to make sure that consumer fraud is not occurring, and that's specifically under what the Attorney General can do. And we also have to look at the Attorney General. I would not only work at a statewide level, but I would champion reforms on a national level to reform our federal patent and drug exclusivity laws to increase our access to less expensive generic laws. There are many things that the Attorney General can do to help with this. We can regulate the prescription benefit management companies and their business practices and how they're using transparency or lack thereof to increase prices of medicine. And as the Attorney General, I wouldn't just be the attorney on the front lines, but I would also bring that law, the legislation, to the legislature on behalf of citizens to further protect them. That's what the Attorney General should be doing, and that's what I would be doing.
Thank you. Rafe?
So I want to talk about two ways, and just two of many, that prescription drug manufacturers take money from us. One is the practice of illegal price fixing. And this is where companies get together and behind the scenes, using very sophisticated settlement agreements, debt swaps, various ways of transferring value, they agree to raise the prices of things like generic drugs. Well, that violates federal antitrust law. But if you have a federal administration like you have now in Trump, that's completely asleep at the wheel and completely unwilling to enforce federal antitrust law, traditionally that's fallen to state attorneys general. Now, you don't win that case hanging out the halls of the legislature. You win that case by putting in the work, running an investigation, and going to court. And that's precisely what the Attorney General does. Another way prescription drug companies take money from us are schemes called pay to delay. They essentially use a loophole in federal law for to take generic drugs and make it take longer for them to get on the market. If you guys remember Nexium, the purple pill, okay? Nexium got caught doing this, where they paid off a bunch of generic drug companies who wanted to come on the market with a Nexium-type pill. They delayed it for just 2 years. They earned something like $6 billion in profit by being able to delay the generic for 2 years, okay? That's money that's not coming out of thin air. That's our money. And it's the Attorney General's job, if the federal government won't, to stand up and take on those prescription drug companies. That's the kind of work I did in private practice as an attorney. It's the kind of complicated litigation I do now for Governor Bullock to much success. And it's precisely why I personally want to be your Attorney General. This is a real problem. This takes money from you now. And without a real advocate in that office, willing to go the distance, to make it a priority, to make the office focus on this and to follow through, we're not going to have any progress. That's why I'm running. And this is a central issue for me. Go to our website, rafegraybill.com. And we've got a whole extensive plan on everything we're going to do on prescription drug prices.
All right. Thank you, Ray. All right. This is the last question under this category I've entitled Consumer Protection. And it somewhat encapsulates a little bit of what we've already talked about. But it's the power of litigation is what I've sort of entitled it. The Attorney General is the people's lawyer and has the power to bring lawsuits on behalf of people. And we've already talked about that a little bit. We know the AG has used its power of litigation in the past to pursue consumer protection in such areas as public health, for example, tobacco, and now the opioid litigation, and environmental pollution cases, just to name a few. Under what circumstances and what reasons do you envision will require you to resort to litigation, and how aggressive will you be in exercising this power of litigation? This one's to you, Ray, first.
I think this is one of the most important, most exciting, and most sacred parts of the Attorney General's role. But by the same token, that's why we have to win this office, because the same power to initiate litigation and to set priorities through litigation will go to a conservative activist like Austin Knudsen if we don't win this race. We are so lucky in Montana to have our progressive 1972 Constitution that enshrines rights like the right to privacy, the right to a clean and healthful environment, the right to equality for men and for women, the right to protect Indigenous communities. These are all rights that should work for us now, but they don't unless we have an Attorney General ready to give those rights meaning and force through the law, through the legal system. I think this is an incredibly important, if not the most important power of the Attorney General. And I think it's something that we have to take very seriously, and I'll be very assertive in doing. There's one last note I'd like to add on this. There's been a worrying trend under Attorney General Tim Fox and some Democrats around the country of just joining on to these multi-state lawsuits. And I'm really opposed to that. I think that it's time for Montana to lead again. And if we're going to lend our name, the name of the people of the state of Montana, to a case, it has to be good enough for Montana. And I'll always invite other states to join what we're doing. But simply signing on to what someone else is doing and then issuing a press release and saying, oh, we did something about it, that's not the kind of Attorney General I want to be, and it's not the kind of Attorney General I will be.
Thank you, Rafe. Kimberly?
Thank you for the question. It's interesting when we talk about issues and priorities and how we'll act, because truly I think, when you're an attorney, you look at past actions and behavior to see what someone will do in the future when you're trying to prove a case. And my record shows that I'm willing to take on the big fights and that I win for the people of Montana. I've been doing that not only as an attorney, but as a lawmaker. I've dealt with these issues that have been ignored for entirely too long and taken on those battles and won. For example, the fact that Native American women are sometimes more likely to be murdered, 10 times more likely to be murdered than non-Native. It's a failure of our system, and it depends on who we're looking at when we want our leaders, what their priorities are going to be. And my priorities are clear. My priorities are to protect people who can't protect themselves, to speak for the voiceless, and to champion those who need their rights protected. And as far as what I would do as Attorney General, I would do all of that. I would resort to litigation when laws are unconstitutional, when big corporations are taking advantage of us, when I'm being the watchdog, the independent watchdog over these corporations that we need. It's what I did when I held the mill site owner accountable in my hometown of Frenchtown, and they polluted the land, closed down, and never cleaned up, then quit paying their taxes. I held them accountable by changing the law to make them pay their taxes, just like every other person in Montana has to. So it's that independent leadership that has to be done. We need to start dealing, though, not with just the sexy issues of the day that somebody really wants to make a name for themselves on, or that they've worked on before and so they want to keep doing it. But we need to look at the issues that are really impacting our lives, like methamphetamine abuse, and the fact that we don't have any real treatment for that in our state. What's the Attorney General going to do about it? Well, I have a plan to deal with that, to build more chemical dependency treatment in our state. As far as how to aggressively pursue litigation, the Attorney General should basically never sleep if there is something that needs to be done on behalf of the citizens of the state. Too many people take these jobs and do it because they want to make a name for themselves, or they want to say that they did something. But I have the proven record to show that I'm in this for the people of our state, to make our state safer and to fight for their rights. I'll continue to do that as Attorney General for all the citizens of our state, however much it's needed.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, we're going to shift now to a broader category that encompasses public lands. So this first question will go to you, Kim. The Attorney General holds a seat on the Land Board, which manages the timber, surface, and mineral resources for the benefit of our schools and endowed institutions. Explain your view of the importance of the Land Board and how you will represent Montanans on the Land Board.
Yeah, public lands in Montana are more just something we walk on or something we talk about. They're really a way of life here. We live here, many of us, because we love our public lands. I grew up in Montana. I grew up on the dirt roads of our state, riding my bike, riding horses in the woods, being in a Moxies. And I want my children to have the same opportunities to enjoy our state lands. We have a constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment, and the Attorney General has the obligation to defend that right, whether it be in litigation or whether it be on the state land board. So as how I will approach my decisions on the state land board, it would be to protect our public lands, to ensure that they stay in public hands, but also to ensure that they're clean and healthy. Too often we just use the catchphrase, keep public lands in public hands, because it sounds nice and it's important. But we also need to ensure that there's no illegal dumping going on in our public lands or even our private lands of toxic material that's being spread into our land or our waterways. And the Attorney General on the state land board, I would be fighting for that clean and healthful environment. I'd be making sure that bad actors are held accountable, they don't get a profit off of our land and then leave without ever cleaning up their mess. So on the state land board, there's management of different issues, and it manages all of our state trust lands, it manages our parks, it manages what we can do for development. And I will continue to ensure that the priority is keeping our public lands in public hands, but also making sure they're clean and healthy, and that they don't get sold off or that they aren't walled off from people who want to use them for their traditional uses, be it they're hunting or fishing, and new landowners come in and try and put up some fences to keep them out. That's not the Montana way. We value our public lands. They're one of our most prized possessions. And as Attorney General, I'll fight for them, just as I've been doing for the last 8 years in the legislature.
Thank you. Rafe?
I couldn't agree more. I think our public lands really are one of the great equalizers in our society, as Governor Bullock likes to say. There's something that we all share, and there's something that's our birthright. I mean, I'm so fortunate that I get to look out my office every day and see a mountain that belongs to all of us that I can go anywhere on. And that's really what makes living in Montana so special and so unique. It's unfortunate how in the last 3.5 years, the land board has become so incredibly partisan and political. And that's because we simply don't have as many level-headed Republicans or simply any Democrats other than the governor on the land board. And that's why it's important to win this seat back. It was actually a case about the land board that went to the state Supreme Court that got me to run for Attorney General in the first place. It was because 3 of these Republicans, Rosendale, Stapleton, and Arnson, were being so ideological and so conservative. They managed to wrap themselves into a position where they both were voting against renters and private property rights and public access, 2 irreconcilable sides of a long-running debate. They somehow got on the wrong side of both. And we ended up having to sue Attorney General Fox and beat him. And I'm very proud of taking direct action in that case to actually do something beyond just talk to protect our public lands. I think that's incredibly important. I think I've shown that I have no problem holding other elected officials accountable. I've beaten 3 of the 5 land board members in court in the last year. And I really think it's important as we go forward and answer the big questions about public lands, about protecting the school trust that the public lands are there for, and about considering how to sensibly and sustainably manage those lands to have some real balance, to have some real independent judgment. And that's exactly what I'll bring to the land board.
All right, thank you. Well, this next question really sort of springboards off of both of your answers here. And it has to do with access to our public lands. The Department of Interior under Donald Trump has devolved into a disaster. David Bernhardt, the Secretary of Interior, who we all know hasn't even been approved yet, is a former oil and gas lobbyist, and William Perry Pinley, the director of BLM, has a long history of advocating for selling off public lands. And we all know, we've seen it happening down in Utah, and even in Montana, there's talk about the feds wanting to lease sacred lands for oil and gas, and shrinking the lands down in Utah. So it's become a real issue out in the West. And so public lands and access there too, as you know, are sacred to all Montanans. What can you do, and what will you do to protect and defend our public lands and its access? And I know you've already talked a little bit about this, but expand a little more.
Well, I'm up, I think, yes. So
yes.
There's really 2 things you do as Attorney General. One, you hold other land board, well, one, you get elected, but then you hold other land board members accountable. You make sure that the land board is doing the right thing, setting the right agenda, and not selling off our public lands. You know, when it comes to folks like Austin Knudsen, the leading Republican candidate for AG, he has made no secret of his desire to privatize public lands in Montana. He's actually taken actions in his own personal life to lock off access to public lands. So we know what they're going to do. We've seen their legislative history. We've seen their schemes at the Montana legislature, and we know what they'll do if they get into power. The second thing the Attorney General can do, which is goes back to your prior question, deals with the inherent powers of the office apart from the Land Board to initiate litigation and to help resolve conflicts in state law through the Attorney General opinion power in ways that promote and protect our constitutional values of a clean and healthy environment, preserving open space, and conservation. I'm incredibly proud to have just last week received the endorsement of the Montana Conservation Voters, our state's leading conservation organization. And I think that's for two reasons. One, it comes from my direct action to actually go to court and defend our public lands and win the way an attorney general would. And also it comes from, I think, the sense that we need to move forward, we need to win this race, and we need to elect someone for whom this has always been a priority and always will be a priority. It's part of the basic nature, the basic fabric of Montana. Public lands will always be front and center for me. And I think the Attorney General has a special role even apart from the Land Board. The Land Board votes themselves.
Thank you. Kimberly?
I think the Attorney General can do even more than what we've been hearing. We have, through my work over the last really 20 years, I know how much land we have in Montana that's landlocked. It's public land and we can't get to it. And anybody who's a hunter goes out there knows that there's those parcels that we can't get to. As the Attorney General, I'm actually the only one with a plan to actually deal with those landlocked areas, to somehow get more conservation easements and get that information available to the public. Because when people want to recreate, they may not know where the conservation easements are, or when a landowner wants to establish one, they may not know the process to do that. And as Attorney General, I plan on making that transparent and very accessible to everyone in the public. You know, and one other thing I think we need to do that, as an attorney, many people just want to fight and hold others accountable. But I've found that actually what the voters of Montana want are for people actually to get together and get things done for the people of our state. So I would actually convene broad stakeholders to come together so that we could actually identify those landlocked areas, any sort of access restrictions that are dealing with it, and how we can get over them to make our public lands, which are such a great public asset, more available to the public. You know, I've been proud as being a woman in Montana and being elected to the legislature. I've been honored to be endorsed by MCV 4 times in all of my legislative races. And I was really, you know, I'm going to address this because my esteemed opponent brought it up, but I was really disappointed that MCV chose to endorse somebody who has never won an election and who doesn't have the record that I do, having 4 times been endorsed by them. And some people are voicing to me that the only reason that happened is because he has more money in the bank. And I find that troubling for various reasons, but it only feeds into the narrative that money controls politics. And I would hope that such a great organization as MCV isn't letting that rule their decisions, especially because as a woman in politics, everyone knows that women are unable to raise as much money as men because there's inherent sexism in our state and in politics, and this only feeds into that. So I just want to address that, and everything is not as clear as it may seem. I have a very strong conservation record, and I'm a conservation champion. As anyone who's worked with me, I've moved our state forward.
Thank you.
Mike, can I just respond to that for 1 second? I really
wait a minute.
The implication
wait a minute, Rafe. I said early on we weren't going to have rebuttal. And I don't want to see this devolve into a big battle between you and Kim. And so I would hope that both of you would, you know, try to stick to the issues. I understand that debate or campaigns can get a little heated, but what the voters want to hear about is they want to hear your views on how you're going to conduct yourself as Attorney General and what you're going to do for the voters if you get a chance to be in that office. So. With that, let's move on, okay? One thing that it's not one of the questions, but it's something I've thought about when I was on the Supreme Court for 8 years. It seemed like we saw quite a few prescriptive easement cases, and I know here in the Gallatin Valley area and over in Park County in this area, there's we're always reading in the paper about prescriptive easements, and people are having to, people move in here from out of state with money and they buy a big ranch or someplace, and there's been a trail that people in the locals traditionally had used to get to public land so they could hunt and fish and camp and do all that. And they close it off. And then, so you end up with a citizen who can't afford to bring any litigation or anything in that regard. So my question is, and let's try and keep the answer to this one fairly specific because I'm going beyond the questions I'm asking. Do you see a role, and we'll let you answer this first, Kimberly, do you see a role for the Attorney General in defending and protecting these alleged prescriptive easements that seem to be, these issues are popping up all the time?
I think there is a role for that. Thanks for the question, because that's actually, I've heard a lot about that, about what else could the Attorney General do to assist citizens of our state to really enjoy the lands that they have. And I know multiple people who, just personally, who have had issue with this when they've been trying to access their land. The Attorney General actually has the ability to issue advisory opinions. And that's one area that I think could be helpful in this, that if there is a conflict in the law and it maybe is unclear, then I would ask that the landowners and the people in dispute, that they actually try and access that unique power of the Attorney General's office to help clear up any confusion in the law and issue an advisory opinion about what the law truly means regarding that specific legal situation, regarding that specific prescriptive easement. It's too hard to say in general that you could do one thing or the other, because everything is so fact specific, and the Attorney General doesn't represent citizens in those private cases, but the Attorney General does have the power to issue those advisory opinions and help clear up the issue. And I think we need to have much more clarity and transparency in that, because it impacts a lot of people in our state.
All right, thank you. Ray?
Yeah, so one of the things I've proposed for the Attorney General's office is to actually hire a full-time attorney whose job it is to get involved in these cases. This is a Bozeman debate, so many folks are probably well acquainted with the Public Land Water Access Association, PLWA. Jim Getz, longtime Bozeman resident, is a big champion for that group and an early supporter of mine. I think doing the kind of work that PLWA does from the position of the Attorney General's office, that is getting involved in cases to open up public access, is incredibly powerful. And it's an incredibly important thing we can do. In my work in Governor Bullock's office, we tried to do this through a position at the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, and that's been an incredibly successful endeavor. But I think we can make that even more powerful with the litigation authority of the Attorney General's office behind a position like that. So that's actually one of my main priorities when it comes to public land access, is having someone that will do that full time. And as folks in your community in PLWA will tell you, there is no shortage of these cases out there, but there is often a shortage of resources and support. When you talk about the state getting behind a case like that, it can make a real difference.
All right, thank you. And thanks for letting me plug that question in there. Next, we're going to shift, and this will be, Raph, you can answer this one first. It's related to environmental protection. And you both have already talked about this. Article 9 of the Montana Constitution provides that, quote, the state shall maintain and improve a clean and healthful environment in Montana for present and future generations. Describe for the voters the value and importance of this provision and how you intend to rely on it for the benefit of your fellow Montanans.
Well, when I was just thinking about this recently. When I wrote the questionnaire for the MCV endorsement, I actually really focused on this idea of for this and future generations. And when it comes to our environment, there is no more quintessential issue than for this and future generations. I just a year ago had my first child, our daughter Genevieve. And when I think about the environment, I think about it the same way I think about public education. It's something that is incredibly important for us to get right now for the benefit of our kids going forward. I think on this issue in particular, Montana, because of that provision of the Constitution, has a really unique story to tell when it comes to making the federal government live up to its own environmental responsibilities. State attorneys general have historically had an outsized role in holding the feds accountable when they refuse to act, first under the Bush administration and now under the Trump administration. And that's the kind of work I want to get involved with as Attorney General, making sure that where we are supposed to receive the protections of federal environmental law, or we're supposed to receive forward-looking policy, but we don't, that we can use this story that Montana's embedded in its constitution to contribute to, and in fact lead those national efforts to make a real difference. And I should mention on this as well, climate change. And I'm sure you'll ask about climate change right after this. But
The next question.
this is the exit. Oh, it is. Okay. Well, we'll talk about that next. But I think that ties in and is incredibly important, and it's something the AG has to prioritize.
All right. Thank you. Kimberly?
This is actually one of the most important issues we're facing. We have such a unique constitution in Montana. We're blessed to have the right to a clean and healthful environment. And I think that really the challenge of the Attorney General is, how are you going to make that real? Those are just words, but how do we make those real for the people of our state? And I believe we can do that by having an Attorney General do multiple things. First is hold those bad actors accountable. Those ones who are going to come in and develop our natural resources, but then maybe abandon a mine or abandon a mill and never clean it up. And so the Attorney General needs to ensure that those bad actors are held accountable and that they follow our laws, that they follow, and that the Attorney General enforces that right to a clean and healthful environment. But in addition to that, the Attorney General needs to be fighting against these federal rollbacks we're seeing to the environmental protections that we have now. The Attorney General for Montana should be championing the right to our clean and healthful environment and fighting back against all of those rollbacks. And we aren't seeing that right now, even though in other states we are seeing that. And something else that's essential is the Attorney General, I would be doing this. I would ensure that the Superfund sites we have, that they're actually being cleaned up as they're supposed to be, and that any of those that are waiting to be put on that Superfund list, that they actually get going on that list to be cleaned up. Because we have a right to a clean and healthful environment now, but it's for future generations. And we have seen some of this toxicity and the pollution stay for generations. Many towns, like Libby has a legacy of this, Butte does, Opportunity, Frenchtown does, where I'm from. And they haven't been cleaned up. It's because nobody is pushing the ball forward. I finally got some changes done at a state level to hold some of those actors accountable, but so much more needs to be done, and the statewide leaders need to be pushing that. And I'll continue to do that as Attorney General because we have that unique privilege and we need to fight for it.
Thank you. I want to point out that it's 7:45 and we've got a number of questions to go here. I may have to cut a few out, but I do want to I want to follow up on what the question we just had on the environment with climate change. Attorney generals around the country are using the courts to fight polluters and industry to protect their states from the devastating impacts of climate change. Is climate change a priority for you? And if so, what actions do you envision employing to protect our state from the long-term consequences of climate change?
Climate change is a priority for me. It is a large priority. It should be a priority for everyone because it is the issue of our generation and for any future generations if we fail to address it. We need to start thinking more as our Native American friends do, that we need to start making our policy decisions, planning 7 generations into the future, because that's what we need to be looking at, the policies we impact. So for climate change, that will be central to all decisions I make on the land board, and our right to a clean and healthful environment plays into that. It's been wonderful to read about these children throughout the nation that are starting lawsuits trying to stop climate change or have some sort of accountability. The children of Montana have a unique constitutional right to do that. And it's something that we should be encouraging and enforcing. As Attorney General, I appreciate the hard sciences. I graduated my first degree from MSU as a nurse in the hard sciences. I appreciate evidence and fact-based decision-making. And that's what I'll be using to guide my decisions as Attorney General. And I also think we need to make sure that our policies actually help at all levels to help deal with climate change. I helped change our law to make it easier for energy producers to adapt to more renewable and affordable climate standards. And we need to start pushing more of that, working in cooperation with our energy producers so that we can start transitioning to a more healthy environment that's less harmful to our climate. Because, 8 years ago when I started as a lawmaker, there was even a fight still about whether or not climate change was real. And that was no longer the fight anymore, because whether you're a rancher or a fisherman, we see that there's a change. There are lower waters, there are higher water temperatures, there are changing growing seasons, and we all need to start acting together and quit making this a political football that we kick back and forth. But I will be convening people as the Attorney General to deal with this issue. All people throughout our state need to be involved, all elected leaders, and I'll be leading that fight, because we need to start dealing with it, and it's starting to be too late to avoid doing it. We need to start dealing with it today and now.
Thank you. Rafe?
I agree. I think climate change is without a doubt the existential crisis of our time. And I think when it comes to the Attorney General's office, we have to think about doing it the way an Attorney General can, the way an Attorney General can actually influence this process using what's unique about that office. And that often in this context means litigation. I think we have to be smart about it. I spent a lot of time looking at what other states have done when it comes to climate change. And I think there are some good approaches and some bad approaches. The New York Attorney General, for example, tried out a theory that, well, maybe you could sue fossil fuel companies on the theory that they didn't tell their investors enough about the climate change risks of their products. And while that might have sounded interesting for a period of time, the New York state courts just bounced that case. That's not a way that's going to make a difference. But if you go to one of the sort of seminal cases in states suing the federal government, it's a case called Massachusetts against EPA from 2003 that basically says states have this special right to sue the federal government. That was a case about the state of Massachusetts saying, hey, feds, you've got these clean air regulations that you need to enforce, and you're not. Well, we're in the exact same situation now with the Trump administration. And when it comes to the enforcement of federal environmental laws that are supposed to protect us, but the federal government willingly abdicates its responsibility from doing, that is where a state attorney general has an outsized role and can do something. And it's that kind of work that I'll be interested in exploring as attorney general. Not just taking any flashing lawsuit that looks interesting, but actually thinking hard about where's Montana's interest, and will this make a real difference?
Thank you. Well, I've got time for one more question now, and so that you guys will have time for your 3-minute closing. So I'm skipping over a few things, and I'll tell you what I'm skipping over, because if we had more time, we'd talk about it. Elections, you know how important that's going to be. Dark money, criminal justice reform. We even had a question about marijuana, but we're not going to get to it. So here's my final question. You've answered a lot of questions about the powers available to the Attorney General and how those powers can be utilized to protect Montana citizens. Is there a particular issue or area, whether it's been discussed tonight or not, that is of particular interest to you that you would like to discuss and inform the voters that's critically important to you if you're elected Attorney General? Let's start with you, Rafe.
Sure. I think an issue that we should talk more about, given that we're on a Zoom call, is the issue of net neutrality and internet privacy. As we move into a digital age, it is incredibly important that the basic bargain that we've received, as long as the internet's been around, stays in place. And that is, if I pay an internet company a certain amount of money to access services, I get fair, equal, open access to the entire internet. The Republicans couldn't get involved in this Zoom call and tell your internet provider, we don't like Rafe, we'll slow him down. Well, that's exactly what the Trump administration wanted to do when it tried to get rid of net neutrality in 2017. It was our Attorney General's job to stand up for us, to stand up for our privacy, to stand up for equal access to the internet and stop schemes just like that. He did nothing. And it fell on Governor Bullock, who then turned to me, to write the first executive order in the country that successfully protected net neutrality. This threat isn't going away. And other threats to our privacy, and more broadly to our ability to make our own choices, especially in this new digital world, are the kinds of problems that attorneys general are going to solve. And I think it's incredibly important we have an attorney general of the generation to know what these problems are, with the experience litigating against and winning against some of the biggest and most sophisticated companies in the world, and who will make those kinds of everyday pocketbook issues that aren't just things that are on the politics part of Twitter, but that matter to real people in their daily lives, day in and day out. That's where your attorney general should be working and fighting for you.
Thank you. Kimberly.
I think this is a great open-ended question that really shows the fundamental difference that voters are tasked with right now. There are good candidates in this race, but I think that the fundamental difference is any issue that matters, and the issue I'm going to talk about is the unchecked violence and drug use in our communities. If we want to talk about issues that truly matter to people's lives, a woman who's being beat by her husband and whose children are being sexually assaulted by that man doesn't care about net neutrality. She wants to know why her law enforcement isn't there helping her, or why they haven't done anything to deal with the meth problem that he is suffering from. And so as the Attorney General, we actually need to, I want to be the people's attorney, deal like I've been doing for the last 18 years as an attorney and the last 8 years as a legislator, the real issues that impact people's daily lives, stopping child abuse, stopping human trafficking, improving our criminal justice system so there's better chemical dependency treatment and mental health treatment. We've made some progress there, but not enough. Our meth crimes are still going up. They've increased by over 300% since about 2013, and heroin crimes have increased by over 1,000. We have enough chemical dependency treatment in our state for about 10% of the people dealing with these problems, but nobody is talking about this issue because it's not the big sexy issue of the day, but it is a fundamental issue. If you talk to any law enforcement or judges, people at domestic violence shelters, we need to deal with the unchecked violence against people in our society, whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous people or girls who are being sexually assaulted 1 out of 5 before they're 18. These are the fundamental issues to our safety that the Attorney General needs to be championing. We have constitutional and fundamental rights in our state and in our nation that need to be at the forefront of our decisions. That's what I'll be doing as Attorney General. Those are the issues I've been championing throughout my 20 years as a professional, and that's exactly what I promise to continue doing as the next Attorney General of the state.
Thank you. Before we get to the closing statements, I'd like to say that I think both of you have done a remarkable job tonight answering some good questions, I think, about what the Attorney General does and what the Attorney General can do. I'm sorry we couldn't get to some of the other questions. There are so many issues that are critically important to the citizens of Montana and that are going to be directly impacted by who our next Attorney General is going to be. So thank both of you for throwing yourselves into the fire. I've been there myself. It's not always easy. And again, I thank you for the great answers that you gave tonight. So now what we're going to do, and we'll start with you, Kim, since you just finished up. You have 3 minutes to give your closing statement.
All right, thank you. Thank you for moderating this. I know it's a unique situation. I appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone out there who's taken the time to listen to this live or whether you watch it later. This is such a pivotal election right now. I'm Kimberly Dudik. I'm running to be your next Attorney General. I come from a union household in Frenchtown, Montana. I am a nurse, a domestic violence advocate. I'm the mother of 4 lovely children. I've been an attorney for over 18 years with extensive civil and criminal law experience. And I truly believe we're at a crossroads in our society. We're at a time right now, and we've all seen it with COVID-19, that we can create a new normal that's better for everyone. Because I don't think it's okay anymore to just go back to the way things have always been done. And we're not seeing the changes we desperately need. I think there are fundamental changes that have been ignored far too long that we need to address, like violence and drugs in our society. We can't go back to the way things have always been, but we need to elect proven leaders who have a record of making change, and that's what I bring to this race. I'm running for Attorney General because I believe it's time we do something about these issues. And I believe I want to be the one to do that for the people of Montana, and that I can be the one to do that because I have the record to prove it. I have broad statewide support, and that's essential for turning this seat from red to blue come November. I have support from over 75 elected, current and past officials from throughout the state. And I've even had Republicans, God bless them, who said they're gonna vote for me if I'm on the ticket because they know that I'm the one who can get things done. There are prominent, diverse groups that have been supporting me. There are firefighters. Carol's List, the National Organization for Women, is supporting me because they believe in an intersectional approach to making real change. And I believe we can make a better future. I believe we can have a future where our kids are safe from abuse. I believe we can combat climate change. I believe we can make healthcare more affordable, and that we can deal with the devastating drug problems that our state has. And I think we can ensure that all voices are present at the table, especially our LGBTQ friends and neighbors and our Indigenous peoples. They need to be included more fully. We're at a historic crossroads, and honestly, this is a historic election. We have the ability to elect the first woman to serve as Montana's Attorney General, who has proven leadership and the ability to get things done and is the most qualified in this race. And this isn't a dream. We can do this. I ask for your support in this race. I've been doing things and making accomplishments for Montana for the last 8 years as a lawmaker. My record is well documented, the things I've championed and brought forward to you. And this is a time that we can make fundamental change. So I ask for people to join me in this journey. It's time that we make change and we elect leaders who can do that. And I'm that leader. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Kimberly. Rafe?
Well, thanks. And I think this is the last event like this we're doing in this race. So it's been a wild ride for the past year, and I really appreciate you doing this forum. I think this forum has really highlighted the ways that the Attorney General really is not a line prosecutor, really is not another county attorney, much as the Republicans would like us to believe that. And traditionally, Democrats haven't won this seat by copying Republican messaging on those points. I think we have a real opportunity in 2020 to fundamentally reimagine what this office is, what this office can do, and the difference it can make in people's daily lives, the real difference it can make in your pocketbook when it comes to prescription drugs, whether insurance companies can boss you around, whether the promise of equality in our Constitution is real or is illusory. That's what the Attorney General fundamentally does, and it requires a committed advocate who knows how to do that kind of work and was a proven track record in the court system to make that difference. I am so proud that over the course of a year as a first-time candidate, we've built a real movement. That movement began working in Governor Bullock's office, beating Trump on dark money, developing a plan to implement automatic voter registration in Montana that I now propose to do as Attorney General. It was developed into getting support from conservation organizations like Montana Conservation Voters, who sees both the real promise in this race, the work that I have done, protecting public lands and taking direct action to secure public access in Montana, and the stakes of this race. I'm proud to be endorsed by workers, by the Montana Federation of Public Employees, the state's largest public employees union. That wasn't by accident. I fought all the way to the US Supreme Court to defend our teachers, our public schools, and our Constitution. That's what the Attorney General does. And I'm proud to have the endorsement of people like Governor Brian Schweitzer and former Senator Max Baucus, because our party needs a future. I think we have a real chance to win this seat in November and to fundamentally reshape what this office does. I'm going to look across the aisle at Austin Knudsen, the leading Republican, at his agenda: dismantle public lands, dismantle healthcare, dismantle the land board. It is so crucially important that we have an independent Democrat in this office, a voice that will fight for Montanans, that will stand up to partisan nonsense and the politics of Helena and do the right thing for our state. I am that advocate. I bring that experience to the table, and I would be honored to have your support in this race. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafe. And on a final note, what I'd like to say to the folks who are watching is that you can see now that we've got very, very qualified candidates for Attorney General. But they're not going to win unless we get out and help them. They can tell us all the things they're going to do, but it's up to us to go out and do the hard work and tell people in our communities who's the best candidate and work hard to get them elected. So good luck to both of you, and thank you for participating in this, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you so much.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.